You may not believe this, but I am not the first scandalous priest to be around. When I was 15, I first heard and read about a Catholic priest who had a scandalous reputation in Poland. This was 1990, and in Poland, Father Arkadiusz was his name, was building the very first hospice for AIDS patients. It was in the suburbs of Warsaw, and late 80s, you remember how scary AIDS was for everyone. So there were manifestations in front of his rectory. There were protests day and night. How dare he bring those perverts to our neighborhood? We don't want our children drinking the same water that those AIDS perverts will be drinking next door. Father Arkadiusz became very known in Poland in the space of 1 year. Today, he actually is a superior general of his order, but at that time, he was like a leper. No bishops, no other priests would talk to him because what he was doing was so scandalous. To take care of the people who are sick with AIDS, this was unfathomable in Poland in 1989 or 1990. And yet at that moment, when I was in high school, I thought to myself, I guess there are different kinds of priests who not only talk the talk, but also really walk the walk. What is it about our human nature that we like to define who the lepers are? In every generation, in every culture, in every century, there is this inexplicable human need to single out a group of people, assign some crazy name to them, like lepers, and keep them on the outskirts or margins of our society, to make them literally the scapegoats for all our misfortunes. In 1990 in Poland, in the last breaths of the collapsing socialist government and the birthing of new democracy, Polish government was very inadequate in dealing with economy, with social unrest. So even the officials for the governments, for the Ministry of Health, took positions against Father Arkadiusz and his project of a hospice for the AIDS patients. It was very convenient for them to talk about AIDS people because they didn't have to talk about their failures of governing our country. Out of a sudden, the AIDS victims became scapegoats. We don't need to talk about our education, our healthcare, our economy. Let's talk about AIDS people. So in the 1919 Poland, I witnessed for the first time firsthand what scapegoating is. And thank God for Father Arkadiusz and his courage to do what is right. But if you think about it, that's why Nazis singled out Jews and Gypsies, because they could not deal with what was happening in Germany between World War I and World War II. If you think that's why we are scapegoating immigrants, legal or illegal today, That's why in every generation we come up with a group of people we can blame all our failures on them and say it's their fault. Lepers never had easy. Before the arrival of modern medicine and of what we know today of all kinds of skin diseases, you would be called leper the moment you had psoriasis or any other skin illness that looked scary. I'm guessing even if you had acne in your 30s, you'll be called a leper, because they didn't know any better. And because acne and psoriasis were contagious and scary, the lepers had to live outside of the society. They didn't have hospitals back then. They didn't have emergency rooms. So once a priest declared you a leper, and why a priest? Because this was the only person at least so educated. So once a priest declared you a leper, you had to leave your home, leave your wife or husband, your children, your village or your town, and live outside with other lepers. You could not shake hands with anyone who is not a leper. You could not hug your wife or your child ever again. You could not come to a temple and pray with others ever again. Once you were declared a leper, you were literally kicked out of the society. Imagine a life where you are not able to hug your child or your parent. Imagine a life when you are not able to come to church and pray with others. Imagine a life when you have to talk to your old friends from a distance of 20 or 40 feet. This was a life of a leper in the time of Jesus and before. So there is a beautiful power in today's readings about two lepers being healed. From the second book of Kings, we have a general of Assyrian army called Naaman, Naaman, who has arrived in Jerusalem to talk about treaty of peace between the kingdom of Judah and Assyria. But because he is a leper and one of his servants is Jewish and knows of a famous Jewish prophet Elisha, he decides, just in case the fame is true, to visit the prophet and ask to be healed. Elisha tells Naaman, what you've got to do is to go to River Jordan, immerse yourself 7 times, and then, God willing, you will be healed. Naaman's first reaction is, are you out of your mind? Jordan is a dirty stream in the middle of a desert. There is a Nile in Egypt, there is Euphrates in Babylonia. Why would I go in this dirty stream and immerse myself 7 times? I am a general of a mighty king. I will not submit yourself to your hocus pocus. Thank goodness his wife listens to his servant girl, and both women annoy the heck out of him until he goes back to Jordan and says, okay, if you shut up, I will do it. So he listens to his wife, he listens to his servant girl, immerses himself in the river of Jordan, and to the surprise of everyone, he's healed. He is not a Jewish person. He doesn't believe in God of Yahweh. And yet, the prophet demonstrates the healing power of God to someone who is unclean, who is not Jewish, and who is an enemy general of an army about to conquer us. It is as if in the 1980s, Soviet general came to St. Louis and asked to be healed of leprosy, and someone told him to go to the Mississippi River. Unthinkable. And yet, the power of God reveals itself in this unthinkable moment. A very similar story with 10 lepers who approached Jesus a few centuries later. The narration of this story is very interesting because Luke says they yelled at Jesus from a distance. That detail is important because as a leper you had to yell at people from a distance. You could not come and shake their hands. You could not breathe on them, God forbid. You had to yell at people from a distance. So they are yelling, "Jesus, Master, save us." He doesn't say, "Hocus pocus, you are healed." It's not Harry Potter's story. Jesus tells them, go to the priest and do what you were supposed to do. Now, what does it mean? Once you were declared unclean or leper by a priest, only a priest can undeclare you leper and make you clean again. So Jesus is inviting them to trust his word before they are healed. Jesus tells them, go to a priest and trust me, by the time you get there, you will be clean. They are journeying to a priest, and as they are walking, they look at their hands and bodies, and they are cleaned. Now, I am not judging the 9 people who did not go back to Jesus. Think about it. If it has been years since you kissed your wife, would you go back to Jesus or run to your home to kiss your wife? Or husband, or child, or mother? No judgment. I guess the guy who went to Jesus was single and didn't have any children or spouse to go back to. But the power of both healings in the Old Testament and the New Testament has one very simple message. God doesn't believe in lepers. God doesn't believe in separating people and scapegoating them and making them live on the outskirts of our society. You see, people often say that the God of the Old Testament is different from the God of the New Testament. The God of the Old Testament, the God of the Hebrew Scriptures, often is portrayed as very severe and judgeful person who is looking and waiting for your mistake, kind of like Santa Claus. You know when you are behaving and he knows when you are misbehaving. And the God of the New Testament, the God of Jesus, is loving, embracing, all-inclusive, kumbaya kind of God. But these 2 readings from the 2nd book of Kings and from Luke's Gospel show us it's BS. The God of the Old Testament is as loving, as forgiving, as healing as the God of the New Testament. You cannot claim to believe in the God of Old Testament when you are protesting the AIDS hospice in your neighborhood, because even the God of the Old Testament did not believe in having lepers in your midst. There is no excuse in scapegoating anyone whatsoever because of our fears or because of the manipulation of the powerful ones of this world. Nobody deserves to be a leper. Nobody deserves to be made into a scapegoat for the failures of our church leaders, for the failures of our government, or for our own personal failures. God doesn't believe in lepers. God doesn't believe in separating loved ones. God doesn't believe in the power of hatred. But God, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, is the same God of love, inclusion, and healing. Amen.